Chapter 1. Learning to Notice the Weight. Chapter 1. Learning to Notice the Weight. I remember the quiet moment when I first realized I had been carrying something longer than my own memory. It was a Sunday afternoon, and the house smelled of coffee and sun-warmed linen, ordinary things stacked like safety around me. Still, an old ache rose up like a familiar visitor, settling quietly beneath my ribs. For a long time, I thought that ache was simply part of who I was, an unchangeable piece lodged in my chest. Only later did I see that it had shape and history, that it could be looked at without being condemned. Noticing the weight is the very beginning of any change. It does not need dramatic revelation or a thunderclap of insight. It often arrives as a subtler shift, a hesitation before answering a phone, a recurring dream, a way of tensing at small disappointments. These are not flaws to be fixed at once, but clues to the parts of life that have been held too tightly. By giving attention to these hints, we practice a gentleness with ourselves that opens space for something different to happen. There is a kind of bravery in simply naming what we feel. I found it helpful to tell one trusted friend about a pattern I kept repeating, not because I wanted advice, but because words have a way of making things less monstrous than they feel in private. Once named, a burden loses some of its ability to bruise us without notice. Naming also allows us to see how expectations, losses, and unmet needs have layered together over time into the heaviness we carry. Sometimes the past shows itself not as a single event, but as a collection of small displacements. In my 30s, I discovered that my reactions to minor losses were connected to things I had never really mourned. The quiet divorce of parents, the abrupt move away from friends, the childlike belief that if I tried hard enough, I could keep everything stable. Recognizing these threads felt less like unearthing a scandal and more like following a map back to where things first started folding in on themselves. One of the most surprising lessons was that acceptance begins with curiosity rather than judgment. When I could ask myself, with real interest rather than self-reproach, why a certain smell made me tear up, or why a birthday arrived with dread instead of anticipation, I opened a door into memory and feeling. Curiosity is not indulgence. It is a form of respect for what has been lived and a way to meet the parts of ourselves that have been waiting for attention. There is also a social layer to this noticing. Our culture often tells us to move on quickly from pain, to tidy up grief like a chore, and proceed with efficiency. That pressure can make the weight feel even heavier because it adds shame to the original difficulty. Letting yourself notice, without measuring how long you take to feel it, loosens that extra burden. It permits grieving to be what it needs to be in its own time and manner. Practical moments of noticing matter too. I would sometimes pause and ask where tension lived in my body, allowing myself to breathe into the tight places and to imagine them softening. That simple habit helped translate abstract sorrow into something my hands could almost touch and soothe. Becoming fluent in the language of my own sensations created a clearer path to understanding what the past had done to me and how I might respond differently now. There is a quiet dignity in recognizing how much we can be shaped by what we did not choose. Abandonments and betrayals, small humiliations, and large losses all leave their marks. But noticing those marks does not mean that we are defined by them. It means we have begun the conversation between the person who lived through those things and the person who is living now. That conversation is the gateway to healing because it replaces exasperation with a patient willingness to understand. As people, we often learn coping strategies that helped us survive once but no longer serve us. Being alert to that mismatch is a delicate form of compassion. Discovered that some of my ready defenses had become prisons. They kept me safe from imagined threats, but also from genuine connection. Awareness allowed me to start loosening the grip of habits that had outlived their usefulness without condemning the part of me that had built them. Bringing attention to the weight does not mean rushing to erase it. Rather, it is a way of seeing clearly enough to choose differently. I found a measure of relief in simply acknowledging my own limits and releasing the idea that every pain must be conquered immediately. In doing so, I made room for patience and for a quieter, steadier process of moving forward. There is a transforming power in telling the truth to yourself about what you have been carrying. It can feel like stepping into sunlight after living a long time in shadow. The light does not make the past vanish, but it allows you to set it down more softly. From that gentle place of clarity, you begin to imagine a life where the past still exists but no longer commands your attention at every turn. 1.1 Becoming aware of quiet burdens. There is a tender beginning to any letting go, and it often looks like noticing. When the ache has been part of our days for so long that it seems normal, the simple act of paying attention becomes an act of courage. This first recognition is not dramatic. It is soft, patient, and honest. How small signals announce themselves. There's a particular kind of intelligence in the quiet ways the past reminds us it is still present. A handshake that feels unfamiliar, the sudden lump in the throat when someone mentions a place you once lived, a melody that loosens a tide of memory. These are not dramatic collapses, but steady little taps on the window. They arrive as sensory notes, a clench in the jaw, a flutter behind the ribs, an urge to withdraw from a room. Noticing them asks only that you register their existence, not that you immediately fix them. When those taps are acknowledged, they stop accumulating like unread mail. Allowing a signal to be simply noticed, naming the sensation, breathing into it, giving it space, transforms urgency into invitation. The practice is gentle and patient, a quiet attention that neither dismisses nor ransacks, offering the body and heart a chance to be seen and soothed rather than hurried into solution. Over time, those small notices teach you where tenderness is needed. Naming softens the grip. Putting a word to what lives inside can feel like opening a window in a room you've been inhabiting in the dark. When grief, shame, or unfinished longing are spoken, aloud to yourself or to another, they are no longer shapeless shadows that loom larger in the silence. Naming is not a promise to change everything at once. It is a way of locating a feeling so you can meet it. Once labeled, the inner pressure often eases because it has shifted from an anonymous force to something you can hold in your hands. There is a particular relief in hearing your own truth reflected back by a listening person who offers presence rather than prescription. That kind of witnessing creates a new relationship with what you carry, from an internal antagonist to an aspect of your story that can be tended. Naming allows conversation to begin, and conversation, even if quiet, is the doorway through which relief and new understanding arrive. When culture adds shame to pain, our social rhythms often reward swift resolution and polished productivity, leaving little room for the messy temporalities of healing. That cultural impatience can make lingering sorrow feel like a personal shortcoming, as if time alone should erase what is deep. Recognizing this external voice matters because it is not truly yours. It is an inherited expectation about how quickly one ought to be over something. Once you see that pressure as foreign, you can begin to separate public demand from private need. Choosing an emotional timetable that is humane and true to your experience is an act of quiet rebellion against that hurry. Allowing yourself to grieve, to sit with discomfort, to move forward at your own pace is not indulgence, but respect. As you reclaim the right to feel in your own time, the added weight of shame lifts, and the path toward gentler healing becomes a personal, steady practice rather than a race to conformity. 1.2 Following the threads back. Once noticing opens a small crack, the mind naturally begins to follow where the ache came from. This tracing is not about blame. It is about curiosity, gentle, patient curiosity that wants to understand context rather than to condemn. Patterns more than single events. Sometimes the past does not hide in one dramatic moment, but in quiet repetitions that taught you how to meet the world. An instinct to tidy your feelings, to apologize first, or to shoulder burdens alone often felt like survival. Over time, those repeated choices became the script you followed without noticing. Recognizing pattern is like noticing the rhythm of a song you've hummed for years. Once you hear it, you can choose whether to keep singing it. Seeing that architecture of response gives you agency. You begin to understand which habits are protective and which are confining. With gentle attention, you can reinforce what still serves you and soften what constrains you, shifting your life's balance not by demolishing the past, but by rearranging the furniture with care. The body remembers what words do not. There are memories encoded in muscle and breath that language can skirt around. I remember stepping into a doorway and flinching for no apparent reason, my palms suddenly damp and my jaw tight. The story in my head could not explain the immediate response. Paying attention to those small betrayals of ease taught me to treat sensation as a kind of honest witness. It often remembers what words leave out. Inviting the body to speak is a patient practice. I learned to place a hand over a hot spot of anxiety and breathe there as if I were offering a quiet conversation. Naming the sensation aloud, even softly, acknowledged its presence and slowly taught my nervous system a new vocabulary of safety. Over time, those tissues learned that they could relax, not because the past was undone, but because care had been given. Mapping without rushing to fix. When you start to map where pain came from, move like a careful gardener rather than an impatient investigator. You are not trying to unearth a scandal. You are tending soil that has been compacted for years. Asking small, curious questions, what happened here, what need was unmet, softens the ground instead of tearing it up. That attitude keeps you from re-traumatizing yourself while still honoring what emerges. This form of mapping gives practical choices. Each discovered memory offers a doorway. Will you set a boundary, offer yourself a ritual of acknowledgement, or learn a different response next time? The value is not in finding exact causes, but in creating options. As you map gently, you gain the ability to reroute familiar patterns, choosing paths that respect your history and the person you want to become. 1.3. Turning noticing into gentle action. Noticing is not an end in itself. It is a doorway to a new way of living with what has been. The next step is choosing small, sustainable actions that honor your limits and expand your freedom. Small practices that respect limits, change rarely needs dramatic theater. It often arrives in the small, steady repairs we give ourselves. A deliberate breath when you feel pulled backward, a brief pause before answering, or a carefully guarded hour of rest are not indulgences, but gentle retrainings for your nervous system. Each tiny act whispers that safety is possible and that time can stretch just enough for you to notice. What makes these practices powerful is their repeatability. Like tending a small garden, consistent little choices loosen old rigidity and invite steadier rhythms into daily life. Pick one micro practice that fits your day and return to it when the old weight returns. Over months, these modest habits become reliable companions, offering quiet evidence that gentleness, practiced often, can reshape how you move through the world, loosening defenses without judgment. The protections you built once served a vital purpose. They were clever solutions born from necessity. Looking at them with tenderness rather than contempt allows you to see their usefulness and their limits. When you recognize the human need that led to a certain armor, you stop shaming yourself and can begin to experiment from a place of care. Start with low-risk moments. Try a softer reply in a familiar conversation. Accept a small kindness, or name a feeling aloud and watch what happens. These experiments are not failures if they wobble. They are invitations to learn a new balance. Over time, you discover that vulnerability and discernment are not opposites, but companions. Openness can be deliberate, and protection can be wise without being impenetrable. Setting down without erasing, setting a burden down, is an act of stewardship, not deletion. You can hold the memory, the lesson, and the scar while choosing when and how they influence your present. That choice creates breathing room. 2 hands free for daily life, for tenderness, for small joys that old reactivity might otherwise crowd out. Sometimes a simple phrase, "I remember, and I am not stuck there," shifts a memory from a live wire into a reference point. The past becomes a map, not a trap. It can guide decisions without anchoring you to one place. In that balance, there is grace. The past teaches but does not command, and each day you practice responses that honor both what happened and who you are now. Freedom grows in that space between remembrance and release.